All right. Full disclosure, this entire video was because of a bet. Oh, wow, I am very short. That's not how short I'm supposed to be here. I thought I oriented all the camera angles. I did not. That's my bad. Anyway, this entire video was to settle a bet. Whether or not I could make a deck type that I've already made once before for $15, but in a different color combination, Super Friends. And specifically with this being right here, lae'zel. Lae'zel says if you would put one or more counters on a creature or a planeswalker, put that many +1 instead. And I said I could turn this into a very, very viable deck. So now I'm really short. As per usual, the rules of this challenge are simple. Build a $15 deck with a commander that is $1 or less. The commander does not take anything off of the price of the deck itself, so the deck may end up being about $16 in the end, depending on what you are doing. The deck must be functional. It must be able to be sat down at a general casual commander night and function just as well as everything else. The deck should work better than a precon. We should not be building something that is just as functional as a precon, though I guess with recent Wizards of the Coast precons, maybe that's not very fair to say. Stella Lee, I'm looking at you. You're basically a couple cards off from a just really, really powerful bonkers deck. Like, that deck is one traitorous greed away from an infinite engine. Anyway, let's go ahead and get into the core strategy of this Orzhov Super Friends deck. As stated before, the commander we're working with is lae'zel, and lae'zel gives us the ability to add extra counters onto creatures or planeswalkers whenever we would put counters on them. This means when a planeswalker comes out and gets its initial loyalty counters, or whenever we put loyalty counters on it for any of its plus abilities, or we proliferate. Any of these abilities, lae'zel will see, so there will be a huge focus on those abilities. We also have the ability to choose a background with this commander, so since we are a deck that is on a tight budget, we need to make sure that our draw power is on point so we can see more cards, because our cards are going to be invariably a little less powerful than the others at the table. So we've picked Scion of Halaster as our special background for this commander. Anytime you would draw a card for the first time each turn, instead look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one into your hand and the other into your graveyard, basically. Well, you throw one to the graveyard, then draw a card, basically. Either way, it doesn't get around Narset, is what I'm trying to say. But the reason I've picked Scion of Halaster is none of the other black cards that are in the command zone seem to do a whole lot for us. But Scion specifically fixes a huge problem we have in a lot of budget decks, and that is running into more dead cards than normal, more cards that are overcosted than normal. So Scion helps us get through all of those issues. We are, of course, a Super Friends deck, so we've got a ton of planeswalkers to choose from. 18 of them, in fact, in our Orzhov colors that fit the budget for what we are doing. And let's go ahead and get into every single one of these right now, starting with Kaya, Bane of the Dead. This is a removal spell, effectively, that says that your opponents and permanents your opponents control with hexproof can, in fact, be the target of spells and abilities you control, irrespective of if they have hexproof. This means that you alone will be able to get rid of the Voltron commander even when they've got a Swiftfoot boots, so this card is going to be a prime suspect of removal. Then we have Teo the Shield Mage, which can make a 0/3 white wall creature and gives you hexproof, protecting you from various abilities that would target you. But the big thing is those white walls. As we are playing a Super Friends deck, a lot of our planeswalkers are very prone to removal via people getting really friendly with their fists. So we need to find ways to protect our cards. Then we have Gideon, Champion of Justice, which we can use to put a loyalty counter on himself for every creature an opponent controls, which can get us very close to that ult ability where we get to exile all permanents. This is the thing we get to use to hold everybody hostage and go, hey, be nice to me, or I can make the game stop. Then his 0 ability turns him into a human soldier with power and toughness equal to the number of loyalty counters he has. And then we prevent all damage that would be dealt to him, so we can use him to just kind of bludgeon somebody in the face real quick. Then we have Kaya, the Orzhov Usurper. For her +1, we can exile up to 2 target cards from a single graveyard and gain 2 life if one creature was exiled this way. This gives us the ability to control people's graveyards a bit, and we can exile a non-land permanent with mana value 1 or less. Gee, I wonder if there is a commonly used Magic the Gathering card with a mana value of 1 or less we may be getting rid of. It's Sol Ring. It's Sol Ring. We're going to be using this to take people's Sol Rings. If they are mean to us, we take their Sol Rings and we never give them back. Her ultimate ability deals damage to target player equal to the number of cards that player owns in exile, and then you gain that much life. So that's an ability that we can use to harm people who have been touched by many instances of Swords to Plowshares. But primarily, this is being used so that we can do graveyard removal and also removal of things like Mana Crypt and, you know, anything with a mana value of 1 or less. I can't possibly think of anything besides Sol Ring we would want to get rid of. Just kidding, the list is long. Moxen are on that list. Then we have Ashiok, Wicked Manipulator. If you would pay life while your library has at least that many cards in it, exile that many cards on the top of your library instead. Then you can, her abilities are paying 1, look at the top 2 cards of your library, exile 1 of them, and put the other in your hand, so a bit of draw. The -2 ability is creating 2 black nightmare creature tokens with, at the beginning of combat on your turn, if a card was put into exile this turn, put a 1/1 counter on this creature. And the ultimate ability, which we might get to, we might not in a game, target player exiles the top X card of their library, where X is the total mana value of cards in exile that you have in exile. Gee, I wonder if this works well with a particular Planeswalker we've already talked about, with another ultimate that happens to deal with exiled stuff. No idea. Anyways, then we have Kaya, the Intangible Slayer. Hexproof, +2, every opponent loses 3 life and you gain 3 life. The 0 is just a draw ability. You draw 2 cards, every opponent gets to scry 1. And the -3 ability on it, exile a creature or enchantment if it wasn't an aura, create a token that's a copy of it, and then it's a white spirit token. So it's removal that also lets us copy things as well. Then we have Gideon Jura. He's a 6 loyalty Planeswalker with a +2 ability. During target opponent's turn, creatures that player controls have to attack Gideon Jura. -2 destroys a tapped creature, and 0, as with a lot of other Gideons, turns him into a big beat stick that can hit people. But none of these Gideons actually have, like, trample or anything, so that's only marginally useful. And then we have the Wanderer here, who can exile creatures with power 4 or greater and prevent all non-combat damage that would be dealt to you and other permanents you control. This is really good to protect you from things like a Blasphemous Act, for instance. Omnixilus Reignited has the ability to draw us cards as well as destroy creatures, and we can also get this lovely emblem that says if an opponent, whenever a player draws a card, the opponent that you give this emblem to will lose 2 life. Most Planeswalkers, if you get to their ult, they'll just kill a guy, and Omnixilus is no exception to that rule. Then we have Elspeth, Undaunted Hero. For +2, we can put a 1/1 counter on each of up to 2 creatures. For -2, we can search our library or graveyard for a card named Sunlit Hoplite, which we are not going to be doing. And then for the -8, we basically win the game. Until end of turn, creatures we control get +X/+X, and flying, where X is our devotion to white. That's right, in a budget deck, we basically get to play Moonshaker Cavalry, because we've got lots of ways to get to these ultimates that we definitely will never get to. I'm lying. Then we have Omnixilus the Hate Twisted. Whenever an opponent draws a card, Ob does 1 damage to that player, and we can -2 this to blow up any creature and then make its controller draw 2 cards. Oftentimes, we're going to use this to blow up our own tokens so that we can just, you know, draw some free cards. And then we have Kaya, Spirit's Justice. This one has a static ability. Whenever one or more creatures you control and or creatures in your graveyard are put into exile, you may choose a creature from among them. Until end of turn, target token you control becomes a copy of that creature. +2, surveil 2, and exile a card from the graveyard. +1 to make a 1/1 flying spirit token. And -2 to exile a creature you control, and for each other player, exile 1 target creature they control as well. Get rid of one of our tokens, and then get rid of something important from everybody else's boards. And then we have Elspeth, Sun's Champion, which can create 3 1/1 white soldier tokens, -3 to destroy all creatures with power 4 or greater, really cool board wipe, and then -7 gives us an emblem that makes all of our creatures get 2/2 and flying. If we ever have that emblem go off, we basically have the game in our hands at that point. Then we have a Johnny Steadfast, +1 until end of turn, up to 1 target creature gets 1/1 first strike, vigilance, and lifelink. -2, put a 1/1 counter on each creature you control, and a loyalty counter on each other planeswalker you control. But because of lae'zel, this is 2 1/1 counters and 2 loyalty counters on every other card. That's insanely good. And for -7, you get a emblem that says if a source would deal damage to you or a planeswalker you control, prevent all but one of that damage, which can make it basically impossible to get rid of your planeswalkers from that point onward. Then we have Elspeth Tyrell, +2 to gain 1 life for every creature you control, -2 to make 3 1/1 soldier tokens, and -5 to destroy all other permanents except for lands and tokens. All really powerful abilities and very, very threatening. Ob Nixilis the Black Oath is next, +2 for each opponent losing 1 life, and you gain life equal to the life lost this way. -2 to make a 5/5 black demon token and you lose 2 life, and -8 to get an emblem with pay 2, sacrifice a creature, gain X life, and draw X cards, where X is the creature's power. If you ever ult Ob, we basically have access to our entire deck on a moment's notice, but most of the time we're going to be just using this to create demon tokens. Then we have Sauron, Lord of Innistrad. It lets us +1 to create a 1/1 black vampire creature token with lifelink, -2 to make an emblem with creatures you control get 1/0, which is a permanent emblem, so the very first thing you should do when you play this card is -2 it immediately to gain that permanent emblem. And then if nobody gets rid of Sauron in the next turn, you can start -2ing him over and over again, relying on proliferate abilities to keep stacking up his loyalty. He is a busted card in this deck. Then we have Basri, Devoted Paladin. Put a 1/1 counter on up to 1 target creature and it gains vigilance until end of turn. Or -1 whenever a creature attacks this turn, put a 1/1 counter on it. Or -6 creatures you control get 2/2 and gain flying until end of turn. We've got a lot of these creature tokens we have basically become lethal's abilities in this deck. And while that does it for all the planeswalkers in the deck, that doesn't do it for our planeswalker strategies. We still got a few more of those to go over, so let's look at the ways we're going to be getting more loyalty counters in the deck. Gulping Scrap Trap is a 5-mana creature that's a 4/4, so it can block a lot for our planeswalkers. Whenever it enters the battlefield or dies, proliferate, so we want this to block lots and lots. Unbound Potential can either proliferate or put a 1/1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures. Remember that both of these abilities will get huge given what lae'zel is doing in our deck. Grateful Apparition will give us proliferate every time it deals combat damage to a player. That Emergence will let us reanimate a creature from any graveyard and then proliferate. Contagion Clasp allows us to pay 4 mana to proliferate and also puts a -1/-1 counter on a creature. Recon Craft Theta, when it enters the battlefield, create a 0/0 alien token with a 1/1 counter, but it's 2 1/1 counters because of lae'zel, which means we can automatically use that new 2/2 creature to crew the Recon Craft, and whenever it attacks, we get to proliferate, which makes the alien bigger. That's kind of amazing in a deck like this, not gonna lie. Then we have Oath of Gideon. Whenever this enters the battlefield, we get to create 2 1/1 white core ally creature tokens, which can block for our commander, and, well, not our commander, everything else. Our commander's not a planeswalker, everything else is a planeswalker. Then each planeswalker you control enters the battlefield with an additional loyalty counter on it as well. So, Oath of Gideon is adding 1 to any of our planeswalkers that are coming out, and lae'zel is adding 1 to any planeswalkers that are coming out. Some of our planeswalkers may actually get to the point where they're damn near auto-ulting with how the deck is built up. We also have 1 card in the Oops, I Win section called Liliana's Talent. This enchants a planeswalker and gives it a -8 ability that is effectively Rise of the Dark Realms. Put all creature cards from all graveyards onto the battlefield under your control. If we use Liliana's Talent, then we will be in a super strong position in the game. Also, whenever a creature deals combat to the enchanted planeswalker, destroy the creature, so we can keep that planeswalker out all the time. Though I guarantee most of the time, if you do that -8, that last ability is not going to matter much. You're just going to be winning. Keep Liliana's Talent in your hand until you're ready to ult one of those planeswalkers, and make sure to strap it onto a planeswalker that has a high starting loyalty amount already. That will guarantee that the card can go off and do its job at maximum power. Going through the planeswalkers that we have here, Kaya, Bane of the Dead, if we have lae'zel out, will automatically be able to use this ult and just win you the game because she comes into play with 7 loyalty. Keep an eye on those super high loyalty ones that you have. Gideon Jura and Kaya Intangible Slayer get really close to that, but they do not necessarily auto ult. But Kaya, Bane of the Dead, if lae'zel is out, will in fact be able to auto ult, which is insane for what our deck is wanting to do. Just immediately everybody's war of attrition has to come to a halt because you win. It's insane. Then we have Onakai Oathkeeper. Creatures can't attack planeswalkers you control unless they pay 1 for every creature they try attacking with. And we can, of course, pay 6 to exile this from your grave and recur a planeswalker from the grave to the battlefield. Semester's End allows us to dodge board wipes with our planeswalkers. We exile all of our planeswalkers and creatures and then drop them back on the board. And when they drop on the board, they get an additional 1/1 or loyalty. This pairs really well with lae'zel because if you drop the planeswalkers and lae'zel away, lae'zel comes down, the planeswalkers come down, lae'zel sees the planeswalkers, give them a extra loyalty, and then Semester's End tries to put 1 additional loyalty counter onto them, and the planeswalkers then go, oh, I liked that. What if I had another one? Just hardened scales for planeswalkers is fantastic. Also, we have Triumphant Reckoning in here, which can return all artifacts, enchantments, and planeswalker cards from our graveyard to the battlefield as a very quick way to just win the game outright if we desperately need it. It's there, it's easy to help us on our way to victory, to just be able to recur all of our stuff all at once. Then, because our deck is focusing so much on tokens, both for their ability to block for us and because they are a essential part of winning the game for us, we also have Elspeth's Talent, which gives a +1 ability of creating 3 1/1 white soldier creature tokens to a planeswalker. And then whenever we activate a loyalty ability of the enchanted planeswalkers, all of our creatures will get 2/2 and vigilance until end of turn. Save this, like with Rise of the Dark Realms, save this for when you think you're ready to win the game. If you've got a couple Sorin emblems out there and you've got 1 planeswalker ready to ult, play this and then suddenly use that planeswalker's ult and you're getting the 2/2 in flying and the 2/2 in vigilance, and you've got the 1 or 2/0 from the emblem. All of your tokens should be swinging for 5 or 6 or 7 each at this point, and that will help you win the game outright with 1 giant swing in an ideal world. In an unideal world, then, you know, we're going to be playing the grindy game that everybody hates in Super Friends matches anyway. But don't worry, we'll get to the other thing people hate in Super Friends matches very, very shortly. But before we get to the painful part of every Super Friends deck, let's talk about the more fun stuff, like drawing lots and lots of cards. So, we have 8 dedicated draw pieces outside of the draw that's attached to our Super Friends that are in the deck. And let's go ahead and take a look of this. Do bear in mind that for the most part, none of these are going to benefit from the other commander we have, the background we are running, because it only affects the first card that we are playing. That will help us sculpt better initial draws, but these will help us push through the rest of our deck. Let's take a look at what we got here. First, we have Feed the Infection, a draw 3, lose 3 for 4, and it has a corrupted ability that in most cases will never actually matter. Ambition's Cost is what the card more likely looks like, drawing 3 and losing 3 when we play it, and Ancient Craving is the same thing, draw 3 and lose 3. Little bursts of draw, because once we have a few planeswalkers out, we're going to be spending mana mostly on either protecting them or digging through our deck. Then we have Deploy the Gatewatch, which will let us look at the top 7 cards of our library, and put 2 planeswalkers, of which we have 18, among them onto the battlefield for free. No casting costs whatsoever. Then we have Hostile Negotiations. Exile the top 3 cards of our library in a face-down pile twice. Look at those piles, flip one face up, hand them to an opponent, and ask which one do you get. Door number 1, which they can see, or door number 2, which they can't see. I love Hostile Negotiation, and I wish that its price wasn't continuing to climb up. I'm hoping none of that's my fault. My channel's way too small to affect market prices. Then we have Cut of the Profits, draw X and lose X life, and it's got Casualty 3. If we've got a token with a little bit of extra oomph, then we can go ahead and crack one of those tokens so that Cut of the Profits will give us a big, nice, meaty hand. Then we have Mentor of the Meek. Whenever another creature, power 2 or less, enters the battlefield, pay 1 to draw a card. Do note this has a bit of a non-bow synergy with Sorin, so if we already have a bunch of emblems from Sorin, then Mentor of the Meek and the other card we're going to talk about, Welcoming Vampire, will end up not working as well for us, but they should work incredibly well in the early game as we are trying to dig to those emblems and static power effects. Welcoming Vampire says when one or more other creatures with power 2 or less enter the battlefield, draw a card once per turn, whereas the Mentor of the Meek can happen multiple times a turn. So you can use Mentor of the Meek with something like Elspeth to put 3 creatures on the board and then pay 3 mana to draw 3 cards. That will work well with him. It'll only draw you 1 card with the Welcoming Vampire though. And all of these together should supplement the other Planeswalkers that we have so far so that we can get through our deck, get to the win cons that we're looking for, and basically play on par with the rest of the table. Now for the part that people absolutely can't stand when dealing with Super Friends decks, the removal package. Because normally we would run about a 10 to 15 card removal package and about 2 or 3 board wipes. But when we're playing a Super Friends deck, we invert that a little bit. Turns out we run a handful of targeted interaction cards and then a lot of board wipes. Because most board wipes don't actually touch the Planeswalkers, and those board wipes need to be able to get rid of the creatures that would be otherwise threatening the Planeswalkers. So let's go ahead and talk about what removal is in this deck here. We've got Wanderer's Strike, which can exile a creature and then proliferate. Spread the Sickness, which can destroy a creature, then proliferate. Settle the Score, which can exile a creature, then put 2 loyalty counters on a Planeswalker we control. Assassin's Ink, which can blow up a creature or a Planeswalker, and it costs 1 less if we have an artifact and 1 less if we have an enchantment, of which we have 11 artifacts and 6 enchantments. Oath of Kaya, when it enters the battlefield, deal 3 damage to a creature and you gain 3 life. Whenever an opponent attacks any Planeswalker you control with 1 or more creatures, this will deal 2 damage to that player and then you gain 2 life as well. Oath of Liliana, whenever it enters the battlefield, each opponent will sacrifice a creature, and at the beginning of the end step, if a Planeswalker enters the battlefield under your control, make a 2/2 zombie creature token we will use to block with, so we get to supplement that token generation strategy. Then, of course, we do have Feed the Swarm, very basic ability to destroy a creature or enchantment an opponent controls, and then lose life equal to that mana value. Obviously, if you are building this deck, if you would like to add in more things like Utter End or De-Spark, then that is on you, but we need to move on to the board wipes we are shoving into the deck as well, because they are doing a lot of work here. Beginning with Kirtar's Wrath, a 6-mana board wipe that blows up all creatures, and if 7 or more cards are in your graveyard, instead destroy all creatures, then make 2 spirit creature tokens with flying. More tokens to survive more bullshit. Then we have Dusk, which will blow up all creatures with power 3 or greater, and it has an Aftermath ability to return creature cards with power 2 or less from your graveyard to your hand. That does include our draw engines, as I showed earlier. Then we've got Fell the Mighty, blow all creatures up with power greater than target creature's power. We can use this to avoid killing our little creature tokens, while also blowing everything else up. Sublime Exhaustion blows up all creatures, and it doesn't cost 7 mana, it generally costs 3 less than that, so this is usually going to be a 4 mana way to blow up all creatures because of the Undaunted ability. Martial Coup will let us create X/1/1 white soldier creature tokens, and if X is 5 or more, blow up all other creatures. Normally we will just go ahead and pay all of our mana into the X, blow up all the creatures, and then use those tokens to swing and win the game later anyways. Then we have Hour of Reckoning, destroy all non-token creatures, so we get to survive with all the creatures we care about, and our opponents can lose all of their crap. It also has Convoke to lower its cost quite a bit, so we will have maximum access to this card, so long as we've got enough tokens to swing at our opponents. Finally, we need to make sure we've got enough mana to pay for all of our stuff. This means having a good ramp section, as well as having access to plenty of good mana sources. So let's get right into what we are running in this deck today. We've got 10 specific ramp pieces here, beginning with Mirror Convert, a 2-mana creature with Toxic 1 that can let us pay 2 life to add a mana of any color, and it is a 2-mana rock that is an omni-mana rock, basically. I adore Mirror Convert, and in a deck like this, hitting somebody with Toxic and then proliferating a bunch and just staring at them as life gets worse and worse for them as they get closer to dying to poison damage is hilarious. You'll probably never kill somebody with poison damage in this deck, but the idea that you might get there eventually is kind of funny to me. Marble and Charcoal Diamonds obviously tap for the mana that our deck wants at a lovely cost of 2. Then we've got Core Cartographer to search for a plains, any plains, even plains that are non-basics, and drop it onto the battlefield tapped. Then we got Fractured Power Stone. Ignore the Plan or Die ability. This is just letting us get a colorless mana. Mind Stone lets us get colorless mana while also being able to sack it to draw a card later. Orzhov Signet is a filter signet. It lets us tap for the colors of our deck. And then we've got Ornithopter of Paradise for 2 mana as well, which can add 1 mana of any color. Then we have a Wayfarer's Bauble, which lets us get any basic land from our deck onto the battlefield tapped. And then we have Gatewatch Beacon. It enters the battlefield with 3 loyalty counters, and whenever a Planeswalker ETBs, Gatewatch Beacon can throw a loyalty counter onto it. Otherwise, it is a pretty run-of-the-mill 3 mana rock, but remember that with our commander, we're basically getting 6 loyalty counters from the Gatewatch Beacon, not just 3. So it's doing a lot of work for us. Next, we got to talk about the mana we are running in this deck, and we'll begin with the dual-colored mana we have access to. Obviously, Command Tower is in here, and Orzhov Basilica, because we are a slightly big mana deck, so I want to make sure we don't screw up early. So Orzhov Basilica is a bounce land that can tap for 2 mana colors, which is good for us. Shine Shadow Snarl allows us to have an untapped land that can tap for our deck's colors, and Snowfield Sinkhole is a tap land, but it does have the typing of Plain Swamp, so it can be grabbed with our Core Cartographer. Then we've got 6 fetching lands, Terramorphic Expanse, Evolving Wilds, both being able to grab a basic land, drop into the battlefield tapped. Then we have Promising Vein and Shire Terrace, which can grab any basic land and put on the battlefield tapped as well, but also, uniquely, can tap for blank mana, just colorless mana, until they need to do that. Myriad Landscape is a land that does ramp us in the game while also being a colorless land until that point comes that it needs to ramp us. And Ash Barrens, one of the unsung heroes of budget decks, taps for colorless mana, but we can basic land cycle it to grab another land if we so choose. Then in the utility land section, we've got Pit of Offerings. Comes into play tapped, exile up to 3 target cards from graveyards when it comes into play, and we can add a mana of any of the exiled cards' colors, or we can just simply add colorless mana if we so choose. Pit of Offerings is a fantastic card. More people should be running in their decks. It is budget Bojuka Bog at its finest. Then we have 12 swamps and 14 plains, because we can't really fit more lands in this deck, as we are right up at the ass end of the budget for our deck. Lastly, let's go ahead and talk about what you do when you don't have a budget, when you are actually trying to upgrade the deck and you want to figure out what cards would go really well in it. Well, the first thing that I would suggest would be a Karn's Bastion. A land that gives you the ability to proliferate is fantastic and always worth having access to if you have not already. Sorin Solemn Visitor is also really, really good to have access to, as well as its +1 ability gives all of your creatures lifelink, and it has the ability to make tokens as well, but giving all your creatures 1/0 and lifelink is a way to get closer and closer to that important breaking parity game-winning turn. Kaya Geist Hunter can give all of our creatures Death Touch until end of turn, which makes it harder to block our tokens. Also, importantly, it lets us put a 1/1 counter, if lae'zel is out, 2 1/1 counters on one of those tokens. It lets us have this lovely -2 ability as well that says that if 1 or more tokens would be created under our control, we get to make twice that many tokens as well. Oh, something I forgot to mention about Sorin. If we have lae'zel out and we have a single card that can proliferate, like say Karn's Bastion, the turn we play Sorin, we get to bring him out at 7 or at 5 loyalty, proliferate him to 7 loyalty, and then immediately neg him by 6 to give every opponent that intensely powerful emblem that says at the beginning of their upkeep they sacrifice a creature. Forcing somebody to have that and them not to be able to deal with it is insanely good. Norn's Choirmaster is also very, very strong in this deck. Whenever our commander ETBs or attacks, we get to proliferate, free proliferation to make things like that Solemn Visitor work. Contagion Engine is a double proliferate that we get to have access to, which pairs oh so well with our commander. Glistening Sphere is a mana rock that has proliferation built into it as well. Lolth Spider Queen will gain tons of loyalty every time one of our creature tokens dies, and if it does get to ult because of that, whenever an opponent is dealt combat damage by one of our creatures, they then can lose they lose 8 life no matter what. If they haven't lost 8 life this turn, they lose life equal to the difference, making it harder and harder for people to stay in the game. Also, she's got a really cool draw engine attached to her. Really good. Staff of Completion is another mana rock that has proliferation attached to it. Tevish Zot lets us make black throw creature tokens for a +2. Basically, any planeswalker that has a plus ability that makes us tokens is going to be important. It's also got the ability to sack another creature to draw us cards and steal everybody's commanders if we ever get to that -10, but that's probably not going to happen. Elspeth Knight Errant, another one with a +1 that lets us make tokens, and a +1 that lets us give a creature 3/3 and flying until end of turn. This can help us deal with problematic players or other planeswalkers, while also just letting us have something that keeps us in the game and relevant and threatening. The emblem ability that gives all of our stuff indestructible is nice too, but we're not really trying to go for that. But again, just like with Sauron, if we bring out Elspeth, and then lae'zel is out and we proliferate, there are some situations where we can get her to ult in a matter of 2 or 3 turns. Then we have Vraska Betrayal Sting, which I need to switch the printing on because, of course, she's always cheaper in Phyrexian. But sorry, Vraska Betrayal Sting has the ability to draw us a card and proliferate with her 0. She's probably one of the first grabs I would get in this deck. No questions asked, no problems at all. That access to easy proliferation is super important. A -2 that makes a creature a treasure token, so easy removal on her, and then a -9 that can give people 9 poison counters, and then of course we can just proliferate them up to win the game. Liliana Dreadhorde Dreadroll is also really good in the deck, a +1 that makes zombie creature tokens, and a -4 that can let us remove threats from the board, and if we ult her, we basically win the game. And then we have Yawgmoth Thran Physician as the last big upgrade. We get to discard a card and proliferate. That's all that I care about on this card. Everything else on it is only mildly okay. Turning our tokens into draw power is fine, but realistically, just being able to discard our hand and proliferate all of our planeswalkers up to win the game is possibly one of the most important things he can be doing in our deck. Hands down, no questions asked, none whatsoever. As for any other upgrades you might want to do, if you have a lot of sack outlets in your version of the deck, then Martyr for the Cause and Blightbelly Rat may actually be better for you. And if you are going that route, then obviously stuff like Sun Titan will do you better than not, as they will let you recur those abilities. But as our version of the deck here is not really focused on that, we are not trying to do those types of moves here. Sorry for everything scrolling bit by bit. That is my bad. In conclusion, the most important part of this deck is lae'zel. The Scion of Halastir is basically here to make sure that we have smoother draws, which is super important in a budget deck. But primarily, the work lae'zel is doing is making sure that our planeswalkers are nice and healthy all the time, and people are going to be incentivized to kill her to get rid of effectively our hardened scales for planeswalkers that we have access to. I think you'll have a fun time playing the deck, as it does have lots of avenues for interaction. The fun thing about Super Friends decks, even as they are kind of annoying to deal with because of their plethora of board wipes and ease of access to removal, is that they do give players lots and lots of options in the middle of a game. Very few games you play in a Super Friends deck are going to be identical to other games that you have played with them, so hopefully playing lae'zel will make things nice and exciting for you. And with this budget deck, this should give you a very good entry point into the Super Friends archetype as well. And hell, maybe I'll make a Super Friends starter deck at some point down the road that's even simpler. But for now, hopefully you guys enjoyed this one. As always, thank you all for watching. I appreciate every one of you that has gotten us this far on the channel. I'm super thankful to the artists who have got me where I am, being able to work with the assets that I have access to, and every person who's been watching, and everybody who's on the Patreon who's been able to help out, and all members of the channel that get access to these videos early, which sometimes is only like 6 hours early because I'm not able to produce these as fast as I thought I was able to. As I've put a little more work into the production of the videos, it's been harder to get them out in a timely manner, but hopefully the higher production quality has been seen, despite some of the weird glitches that still happen regardless of that. We used to have issues with noise in the background and audio quality and all kinds of stuff that I think I've managed to clean up by now. Anyway, I'm rambling at this point. Thank you for watching. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you haven't already, and as always, everyone, insert end of video tagline here. Hey, I just quickly want to give a thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who keep this show running. YouTube and Twitch are a pretty bumpy ride at the best of times, and the stability a Patreon provides me is worth more than I can say here. I'd also like to thank each and every one of my $20 and up patrons here. They would be Red Joker, Britzkrieg, Cameron, Dren, Jemshin, Smiling DM, Poundini, Nabbity Babbity, Naomi, Isaac, Agamotto, Jordan, Ravi, Giuni, Kiratorian, Prisma, all of you, I'm not saying that part, and Starlight. And finally, thank you to everyone else that helps keep this channel alive. While you're here, why not check out another video? And thank you for watching.